So joining us on Pentamental today is Mike Clelland. Mike runs a website called Hidden Experience. It is focused mostly on the intersection between the ET experience and, strangely enough, owls. So I'll leave it at that and let Mike maybe introduce himself a little bit, and then we'll get more in depth to what this is all about. So Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And there's more going on than just the owls and the UFO contact experience, though that has been kind of a focus lately. And I'm working on a book project right now that's getting, who knows how close it is to being finished. This has sort of a life of its own. But yes, there's something going on. There's an intersection between the UFO contact experience and owls. And it has been a bottomless pit where the problem now is that I've got too much information. I've got too many people contacting with too many amazing stories. Not that I don't want people to contact me and share their owl UFO stories, but it is shocking how they go hand in hand. You know, it's not 100% of the people who see UFOs will also have some odd owl experience. And it's certainly not, people who see an owl won't, then necessarily see a UFO, but there is some overlap there, and I do not understand what it is. So just more questions are being raised than answers. Let me put it that way.
So what motivated you to start your site then? And I guess what is your general focus beyond just the ET owl intersection and kind of what are you trying to accomplish there?
The first blog post goes back to 2009, probably March of that year, and I went to a UFO conference, and I had been dealing with some of my own life experiences that when you look at them and all on a timeline, and some of them have been a bit more impactful than others, and some of them are a little fleeting, but it seems like I certainly would fit into the category of UFO abductee. There was a point when I would have really had a hard time saying that and having it feel honest. At present, it feels honest. I feel like I've kind of had my, whatever the confirmation type events that have erased any doubt in my mind. But so anyway, at 2009, I had not gotten to that point. I was very mixed up, very insecure, very freaked out about the whole thing. But I went to a UFO conference, or I think I'd been to a couple at that point. It's interesting. The conference that I went to is running right now. The first time in like 7 years or something that I haven't gone to the conference. And that it used to be called the Laughlin Conference or the International UFO Congress. And now it's run in Scottsdale, Arizona. So Laughlin, Nevada is where it used to be run. It used to be 8 days long, and now it's run in Scottsdale, and it's 5 days long. Anyway, while I was there, I spoke to a woman named Miriam Delicato and kind of told her some of my experiences and like, what do I do? And I was kind of freaked out, and she was very thoughtful and listened to me very carefully. And then she just kind of said, you need to speak out more. You need to talk about these experiences. She just kind of left it at that. And then when I got home, long drive, I was living in Idaho at the time, and I was driving home from Las Vegas, or the Las Vegas area where the conference is. So, and as I recall, I think I pulled into my house, and I don't even know if I took my coat off. I think I sat right down at the computer and started a blog, and that was the genesis of it. So initially, if you scroll back to the original postings, I think I've got almost 600 postings and stuff now. The initial ones were my own, almost like my own internal dialogue that I had transposed to the blog format, where I was like, is this happening? Could this be happening? What's going on? I mean, it's like you do not have to read between the lines. I was on shaky ground at that point. And then I started doing some audio interviews. And the reason I've started doing audio interviews was 100% self-therapy. There were people I wanted to talk to from my own very selfish reasons. And I figured, well, if I have a blog, or excuse me, like a podcast, I can just get those folks online and do an audio interview and ask the questions I need asked for my own reasons. And I had a bunch of owl experiences where I had seen owls, a very unusual number of owls being way too close, and seeing them with the same people and in different places. And anyway, so, and that was going on from about 2006. So one of the questions I asked everyone in these audio interviews was, what's going on with these owls? And almost everyone kind of gave the pat answer of like, well, owls are symbolic of wisdom, or owls are noted as a screen memory for UFO contact. And I would say that the owls that I was seeing, I feel very strongly, were not screen memories, but they were real physical owls. They were like an owl size. And I don't know up to speed your listeners are, but there's a term, screen memory, that is used within the UFO abduction research community, and it shows up in any kind of books on the subject. And what will happen is people will oftentimes report seeing unusually large owls. They'll say, there was an owl looking in my window, it was huge, these big black eyes. Or they'll say, I was driving down the road at night and there was a giant owl standing in the middle of the road. And the next thing I knew, I was arriving home, and I had somehow arrived home 3 hours later than I should have. I've heard that story in one form or another so many times that it's very much a part of the UFO abduction lore. It shows up repeatedly. But that's not what I'm focused on. What would be the screen memory? The implication is that there is some sort of hypnotic or telepathic or psychic interaction between what would be quite probably a gray alien and the experiencer who sees the owl. What they're actually seeing, I mean, they're seeing in their mind's eye, they're seeing an owl, but that's not what's in front of them. The implication is that what is in front of them is some sort of gray alien with the big black eyes. So the question originally was, how did I start my blog? And now, what is it, almost 6 years later? Good grief, it's almost going to be 6 years next month that I'll be running this, which seems kind of hurts my brain to think about it, that I've gone that long. And now the blog has been more like an outlet for me to share some of my thoughts, as well as the postings that I'll add there, links to other people's articles, links to videos that I think are important. And I used to do 1 or 2 podcasts a month, and I've kind of gotten away from it a little bit, and I need to get back into it. So now it's about one a month, or one every 2 months or so. And that's just my own life has been busy, and I haven't had a chance to keep up with the long list of folks I desperately want to talk to.
I want to ask you about, it sounds to me like you have 2 ideas about this. Aliens being mistaken as owls, and owls kind of ushering in an alien abduction experience. Like real owls.
Well, owls being mistaken, or aliens being mistaken as owls, I don't think they're necessarily mistaken the same way that, I mean, people are telling of seeing owls. People will say, I had this impulse to step out onto my back porch. And I walked out onto the back porch, and there in the yard staring at me was a 4-foot tall owl. And then I can't remember anything else. So under hypnosis, which is totally questionable, and there's reasons to be skeptical of the information that comes out of hypnosis, not to say that it's impossible to glean information out of it. But what will happen is people will say okay, I'm stepping out into the porch. I see the great big owl, but I don't think it's an owl at all. And then they'll realize, in this hypnotic state, that what they are looking at is not an owl, but a gray alien. So that is one aspect of it. Okay, so that's almost, you can have one file cabinet on one side of your desk, and that's all the screen memory owl sightings. And then on the other side of the desk is another file cabinet, which I find much more interesting, is people who are seeing real owls. And I do not understand what is all about. The most fruitful avenue of speculation the thread that I've pulled on that has been the most rewarding is to treat the owl as an archetype. And there is some archetypal reason that the owls are showing up. The owls are showing up the same way that a totem animal would show up. So if, for instance, you were a Native American and you were walking down a path and, a bear walked across your path right at a moment of internal turmoil, the bear would cross your path. And then you would rush to the village shaman and say, there I was walking down the path and I was thinking about these important thoughts. And then this bear crossed the path. And the shaman, who is well versed in the traditions of the tribe, as well as well versed in the goings on of the other world, may offer some advice and say, the totem animal of the bear means this. And then the person might, the same way you would go to a therapist in modern times, you might go to your shaman in ancient times. Well, the owl is appearing in a way that seems to be like a harbinger of the UFO contact experience. And I don't quite know why they are showing up. I have, in my written work, speculated all over the map, and I'm quite certain I'm running up a bunch of blind alleys in this speculation. But, for instance, I got this letter from someone. I'm going to be very cautious because he hasn't given me permission to use his name. But he had been seeing a lot of floating orbs, which is very common for folks to see floating orbs rather than a big metal spaceship. So he's looking up at this floating orb, and he realizes there's an owl on the tree branch right near him. And the owl's looking up at the floating orb, and he's looking up at the floating orb. So there's an owl and the person looking at the same thing. I've got so many stories of people saying, like, there I was in the, woods, and I was looking at this beautiful owl on a tree. It totally surprised me. The owl flew off, and the next thing that happened is a UFO flew over. I've got that in one form or another over and over again. I got the other way around where someone will say, like, I was sitting on my balcony and I was looking out and I saw this UFO fly past. And I was like, I moved over to see where it went, and I peeked around the corner, and I realized I didn't see the UFO anymore. And this person said something to the effect of, they had this thought like, oh, I want to see my friends. And the next thing that happened is an owl flew by. And then for the next few weeks, this owl hung out on her balcony. I've got that story in one form or another. So, people seeing UFOs and then seeing owls, people seeing owls and then seeing UFOs, people seeing owls and UFOs at the same time. I have one story where a woman is on a beach with her husband, and she hears an owl hooting, and she's like, oh, where's this owl? I hear an owl hooting. And her and her husband look around, and they look in the trees, they don't see anything, and they look straight above them, and there's way up high is a shiny silvery craft, like hovering above them. I have people saying, this is actually surprisingly very common, is people will say, I heard owl hooting out my window. Lying in bed, I hear an owl hooting out my window. This is no screen memory because they're not seeing anything really, but they hear the sound of an owl hooting. The next thing that happens is there are gray aliens standing in their bedroom.
You have a lot of these stories piled up. So what would you draw as conclusions? What are some of these speculations that you've come to?
Well, one avenue of speculation, which I think is very interesting and actually surprisingly makes sense, is that here, I'll jump back and tell another story. A woman contacted me. We spoke for a long time. She had an amazing classic UFO experience where she was driving down a road. I think it's somewhere in New York. And I think she saw a UFO. The next thing she knows, she's many miles further down the road than she should be. She's well off the highway, and she's parked behind some big gravel pile. She had no idea where she was. There was no break in time. While she's driving, she sees a UFO. The next thing she knows, she's behind this big gravel pile. Well, from that point on, she was flooded with this conversation in her head. And the way she described it, she says, it's from my old ancestors. These are my ancestors, and they're all shamans. And she has this amazing story where they were like telling her, you need to be a shaman. You need to follow this shamanic path. And she was like, where is this coming from? Who are you? And these voices would say, oh, we're your old ancestors. And then they said, okay, what we need you to do is we need you to go to the tea aisle at the grocery store. And we want you to go to the tea aisle, and we want you to look at every tea box and read the ingredients on every tea box in the aisle in the grocery store. And when she did that, her impression was that she would look at the back and it would say, black tea leaves, orange peel, and these, she could almost hear the voices in her head going, oh, and so the implication is there's these disembodied entities that are living in a place where they can't drink tea anymore. And so they just wanted to, so in essence, what was happening is they were seeing through her eyes because they were reading the box through her eyes. So that has shown up in some form or another in a lot of accounts, though that one I thought was really wonderful. So the implication is, could the owls be a kind of camera? If they can do that to this lady, why can't they do that to an owl? Why can't they just put a little psychic zap on the owl, see through the owl's eyes? And on one sense, there is no better animal on Earth to be like a ET surveillance camera, right? I mean, owls have great big eyes. They can see in the dark. They're very stealthy. They're very quiet. So, for instance, if you saw an owl on a branch outside your window, that's probably possible. And most, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, it's interesting, and owls are cool to see, and it's unusual, but it, wouldn't rock your world in a way. So these owls could be very stealthy. Also, owls have very good hearing, so they could hear what was going on, in a window. So that's one avenue of thought, that aliens.
That's really cool as a biological kind of surveillance tool rather than a technological surveillance tool.
And there is no better biological surveillance tool on Earth than an owl, because it has such good hearing and such good vision. And it can follow you around and fly around. And I've had lots of stories of people who've had the UFO contact experience tell of, they say, oh, then one day this owl showed up and it, it followed me for the next 3 years. I would leave the house. I would go to the grocery store. The owl would follow me to the grocery store. I'd come out of the grocery store. The owl would be on a lamppost and would fly home and follow me home. So I hear those kind of stories. So that's one avenue of speculation. It's very interesting. It's very fruitful, but there's weirder stuff going on than that. People have psychic conversations with the owls, and the owls usually kind of give the same message in a way, which is, one of the messages is like, you're not ready. People want to see an ET. This shows up in my research too. People are like, I want to see an alien. I really need to see an alien. I'm going to go walk in the woods alone, and I'm going to see an alien. And then they'll see an owl instead. And I have one woman who basically said she had a psychic conversation with the owl, and the owl said, you're not ready to see the SSETs. It'd freak you out. So here we're showing up like this. And that avenue of speculation has been very fruitful. Another thing is that owls have such acute hearing and such acute senses. Could it be that the actual UFO, for instance, like a flying saucer, it's an unknown form of propulsion, right? I mean, people say the flying saucers glow orange, and then they glow green, and then they fly totally silent, and there's all these things that are described that are very unusual, that we don't have craft that can glow orange and fly silently. So some very unusual propulsion system is at play with these craft. Does the owl pick up on it the same way that a dog picks up on a dog whistle? Like if the owl's like in the neighborhood and a UFO is invisible hovering above the house, is the owl just out of pure curiosity just going to show up at the house and say, what's going on? Is the abductee, who has been through some sort of, quite honestly, like transmuting through time or something like that? People often have these very odd experiences where time is distorted or sound is distorted, or they'll come back from a UFO abduction event and they'll blow light bulbs and electronic equipment won't work. I know a lot of abductees who say they can't wear a watch. The watch breaks. It just stops working. So something's going on. Can the owl see that? Can the owl sense that? We can take aura photography. We can just use special camera things and see the heat rising off someone, infrared photography and stuff like that. And is there something the owl is seeing in these people who've had direct contact with UFO? Like some sort of aura that they sense. So once again, I don't have an answer. This is just my own attempt to rationalize what seems completely irrational.
I think that's an exciting thing to do. And animals have different intelligences. Owls have always seemed very mysterious to me, and I don't quite know why. I don't know a lot about owls.
They seem mysterious to everyone. I think they seem mysterious to, I'm sure they seem mysterious to cave dwellers, 50,000 years ago. And I'm sure, and I know they seem mysterious now. I've seen a lot of owls. They have such a powerful presence, and they have these weird big eyes, and they don't have a classic bird-like motion, right? So most birds are kind of twitchy and kind of nervous seeming. But owls don't have that. Owls have this very, very calm presence about them. And people who train owls and things like that say they are a little on the simplistic side. There's other birds, parrots and ravens are much smarter in a lot of ways than owls. So the wisdom thing comes from Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom, always had an owl as her companion. So she's, illustrations and sculptures of Athena had an owl with her. Athena is where we get the name Athens, and the Athenian coin from like 300 BC had Athena on one side and an owl on the other, her companion. So the goddess of wisdom had a companion owl. Now this is getting close to, this is well over 2,000 years ago, and we still have owls representing wisdom in the sense that even little kids graduating from, elementary school, when it comes time to go to junior high school, there's funny little owls on the, on their backpacks or whatever. You know what I mean? The little decorations that you put up in an elementary school classroom would have an owl on it. So these things, these archetypes, the kid may have no knowledge at all of Athena in Greek mythology, but there may be an owl with a little graduation cap and a little black gown thumbtacked to the bulletin board in the classroom.
So do owls have any kind of super ability? Like a raccoon has the amazing sense of touch.
Owls have, without a doubt, what is probably the most acute sense of hearing of any animal in the animal kingdom. And I think it's the tawny owl, which is a native to the UK. I mean, whatever, Europe and the United Kingdom and stuff like that. We don't have tawny owls here. And they are thought to have the best sense of hearing of any owl or of any animal or vertebrate. So I don't know.
And it's very wave related. So I don't know, frequencies of UFOs are attracting them perhaps.
Yeah, so the owl could hear something that we don't hear at all. It's estimated that an owl can hear a mouse at a half a mile. An owl sitting in a tree can hear a mouse scurrying under the grass a half a mile away, and then fly in the dark and catch that mouse. And then the owls also have amazing night vision. They also have very stealthy, silent flight, which is an odd thing that's a characteristic of a UFO, is reported. The UFO itself has silent flight. That's what people will say. Then oftentimes people will say that, the UFO flew over the house, or I was taking out the garbage and I looked up in the sky and this UFO flew over and it was weirdly quiet. But they don't say that the craft itself was quiet. They'll say that everything was weirdly quiet. They'll say that all of a sudden the cricket noises in the yard, or the rustling of the tree leaves was reduced to zero sound. And then when the craft flew off, the sound slowly came back. So owls and UFOs both have silent flight as part of their characteristics. This may mean nothing at all, but I mean, this is just the kind of stuff I'm struggling with or wrestling with, is trying to put this research together into some meaningful form.
And beyond aliens maybe taking over owls, we know from certain shamanic traditions that that's been at least reported by shamans as part of their practice, that they can project their consciousness into the bodies of other animals to maybe, again, sense where they're migrating for the winter, in case they're a semi-sedentary or nomadic people, so they can keep up with their food supply. So in that sense, utilizing biological technology beyond, say, plant life and other technologies around them, that was one pathway of access to information that nowadays we try to use all other kinds of external technologies that we make from scratch instead of being in a symbiotic relationship with nature. And so in that sense, again, tying shamanism, ET, and the owl together, that is a idea of awakening, like a spiritual awakening or something akin to that. And in so many instances, the ET experience is kind of traumatizing, but other ones are described either maybe more innocently or something actually profound is triggered in the person that experiences it. So, I mean, I guess what percentage of these would you categorize as spiritual or something resembling a shamanic archetypal awakening, or do you draw a line between those two things? How do you differentiate?
Well, I mean, the classic shamanic initiation in some parts of the world is very brutal. You know what I mean? They, on some level, they would take the initiate who does not volunteer for the role. The elders in the tribe will choose the next shaman, and they'll drag that, usually a child, off into a cave. And then, on some sense, there's some reports of native traditions where they will beat the child to the edge of death, and then they'll come out of the cave. And then, so they'll have a metaphoric death and rebirth, maybe played out through, a sweat lodge or ceremonial dancing or something like that. But, sometimes it's actually played out where they will take the initiate and almost kill the young initiate and put it through powerful trauma. And that is the same thing that's reported by some people who've been, had the UFO contact experience. Horrible, traumatizing stuff has been reported. Really scary, freaky stuff of, being on the operating table. And I mean, I've had, there's written reports of people looking down and realizing their body's been chopped up into different pieces. And then the aliens are putting all the pieces back together. Is that some sort of projected virtual reality, or were they really chopped up into small pieces and put back together? I don't know. My sense is that would be some sort of theatrical presentation, though I can't answer that in any meaningful way. And then sort of the benign, I've been looking at the numbers, and actually there's an organization called FREE, and I wish I remember, FREE, Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, I think is what it is. And I think you can look that up online. It's free.co. Excuse me, it's experiencer.co. Is the way to look it up. I think if you looked free experiencer, it would come straight up. But they just did some preliminary research. And, one of the questions they asked was, has this been benign or has this been terrifying? And it's about 60-40 weighted towards the kind of love and light side of things. That doesn't mean that, that wins and that's what the experience is. That just means that there's a big divide where some people have terrifying experiences and some people have blissful experiences. Some people will begin with terrifying experiences and end with blissful experiences. Some people, they'll be all mixed up. And then also folks who have had this contact experience are often very highly psychic, highly spiritual, highly sensitive about the natural world. It's almost a thing that I've met so many people who said they started taking up Reiki healing. So people like doing hands-on healing, or I guess Reiki is hands-off healing. That doesn't really they don't usually touch the person. So that people would do hands-on energy healing or some sort of Reiki therapy. That's a very odd statistic that I've never had anyone follow up on. The number of Reiki healers that are probable UFO abductees. And then every questionnaire that's been written up by a UFO researcher always has the question, how would you rate your psychic skills? Or most people who've had the contact experience will say they are either have had psychic events or that they're highly psychic, which is the same thing I guess you would say of a UFO abductee as well as a shaman. They would be highly psychic. Another odd thing is a lot of shamanic experiences will depend on, at one point in the shaman's life, having a near-death experience. So there's a death and rebirth experience that's literal. It's not like a metaphoric thing where they take you to the cave or the sweat lodge and perform some ceremony. I mean, this is, people who have actually died. And then I've actually met UFO abductees who have also had the near-death experience. And those people are off the charts psychic. And I don't know anyone who's really followed up on that. But, that combination, UFO contact, near-death experience, you're interacting with someone who's quite probably extremely psychic. So
in these cases, do you lean towards, okay, we're going to inner space and encountering these entities, whether they have a ontological or real existence to them one way or another? Or do you think it's interplanetary? Do you think it's some mix because we have these external reports of ships in the sky or crash landings and this recovered technology or whatever, but then we have these also hyper spiritual or dreamlike, maybe somewhere intersecting symbolic type of things that also have some objective quality to them because people come out with either scars or something to signify that they've been somewhere else and experienced something, even though it's not as obvious as other blatant abduction experiences. So I guess what is the distinction between those? Have you sorted that out, or is that just a big question mark at this point?
It's a big question mark. And I used to, as anyone who first picks up their first UFO book just assumes that it's like, oh, it's aliens from another planet. There's sort of a logic. It's a very simple deduction to come to that conclusion. The problem is that these events, this is Nick Redfern says this, and I really think this is a great way to look at it. It's not just that the UFO contact experience is weird. It's too weird. It's weird in a way that, little scientists in a metal spaceship that no longer fits because the experiences themselves get so bizarre that are reported. And Anne Strieber, Whitley Strieber's wife, will say she has her BS detector. She knows people are if people are making something up. Because if it makes sense, she's doubtful. And basically she says if it's not so weird that it doesn't make any sense, then she doubts the people. These experiences come from almost a dream logic at times. So, yeah, that's difficult to answer. Now, it may be partially somehow beings from another planet, and that may hold some of the answers, but not all of them, I think. It may be some blending of that. So my question is, if you have a UFO contact experience, who do you call? Do you call a UFO researcher? Or do you call a shaman? Who is better suited to offer help? Someone who's going to talk about the spiritual aspects of something that's beyond the veil. That's what the shaman does. They access these other realms. Or would it be someone who would go out into the backyard and measure the burn mark with a tape, take their notebook and write down that number, pragmatic number? They would write down how big the burn mark is in the backyard, and they could write very pragmatic quantitatable things, like what time did it happen, and then they could put a number and that would correspond to a clock. And men, this is very interesting. I get a lot of grief for this, but my sense is that men, this is oversimplifying it greatly, are very much the nuts and bolts side of the equation. They want facts and times and data and charts, and women are much more comfortable in the emotional, the spiritual, the sensitivity, the implication side of things, and don't depend on that. And if you go to a UFO conference, there are two totally separate camps, and saying it's men on one side of the room and women on the other is oversimplifying. It's simply not true, but it's sort of true. And so I guess the original question was, is this a spiritual experience that involves accessing other realms? And my answer would be yes. And then the other way to address that would be anyone who has had these types of experiences where they are confronted with something so illogical and something so out of the bounds of what they were taught in high school physics, let's say, or what the New York Times defines reality as, that you are confronted with something so traumatically bizarre that you are from that point onward, that cosmic egg has been cracked, right? So you're no longer the same person you were because the